was the most.
I did not realize that London was the largest city in the world at one point. That actually blows my mind. I mean, I could definitely see it. I could see how. It's just... What is going on, guys? It is JJ here, back with a new video today, once again, and today we're going to do a city comparison between two of the largest cities in each respective country. We are taking a look at none other than New York City and the city of London. Now, this is going to be a very, very odd video, simply for the fact that I've never been to New York City or London, so this is going to be a very new video for me, and it's a whole new experience in itself. Yeah, I've been around, near New York City to DC, which is just a bit south, obviously. I think you can take a train straight to both, but never been to New York City. And obviously I've never been to London because all I do is ask you guys about things in the UK, and it's a very, very insane comparison to me. But yeah, we're gonna take a look at New York City versus London. You guys can let me know your thoughts on the differences between the two. They're both humongous metropolitan areas, have plenty of boroughs in between different cities. So the cities themselves are not technically this large million of people body. It's just the separate sections of the cities. But yeah, let's get into the video. As well, guys, you can find the original video just down in the description below.
This episode is brought to you by Hero Wars. If you're anything like me, you definitely get nostalgic about old school RPG games. Well, lucky for us, Hero Wars is one of those legendary RPG games of the past that finally made its way online. It's a mobile game available for iOS
skip ahead
and
just a
Android
little
devices.
bit.
You get to pick your own army of Dominion heroes and fight off vicious invaders. You get to train guards.
Okay, now we're ready. Jeez.
Followed by Charleston in the USA, followed by Chiang Mai in Thailand. These three places, however, don't even get on the top 20 places to actually live in this year's Quality of Living Index, a yearly list compiled by HR firm Mercer. Apparently, if you want to live the good life, you should move to Vienna, Austria, Zurich, Switzerland, or Auckland, New Zealand. The top 20 list doesn't include any cities from the UK or the USA, two countries that have arguably been the two heavyweights in the last century regarding power and wealth. These two countries, however, contain cities that attract millions of overseas visitors every year. Today, we are going to compare them in this episode of the infographic show, New York City versus London.
New York City versus London. Yeah, this is going to be a very, very interesting one.
The cities are two of the most visited places in the entire world. In 2016, though, the most visited city in the world by international travelers was Thailand's capital, Bangkok. 21.47 million people visited Bangkok that year. In second place was London with 19.88 million visitors, and in third place was Paris with 18.03 million visitors. The most visited US city was New York City, and that was in fifth place with 12.75 million visitors. Dubai
Bangkok nearly has double the amount of visitors.
Bangkok held the first position 3 times and London twice. In our comparison, we might thereby deduce that London is more visitable than New York City.
It definitely is.
Why. First, we will take a look at the two cities.
It's a lot harder to get in the US. We want to come here at this moment.
The city of London is old, but nowhere near as old as some cities in the Middle East, China, or other parts of Europe. You'll know from our show on the British and Roman empires that Britain was invaded by the Romans in 43 AD. They established the city of Londinium that at the time was about the size of a small village in England right now. When the Romans left Londinium, it was pretty much a ghost town, and for hundreds of years it remained so. Even the invading Vikings didn't do much with it, and it wasn't until the Normans invaded from France and subjugated the country that London became a powerful city. William the Conqueror made London the Norman stronghold, building the famous Tower of London. The Normans would be the last people to this day to successfully invade England. In medieval times, London grew in power and wealth, but that also included the spread of poverty, corruption, and greed among the upper echelons of society, and bouts of population-denuding plagues. It wasn't until 1850 that London became the largest city in the world in terms of population. Some sources say it was as early as 1825, though most scholars agree that London was the most.
I did not realize that London was the largest city in the world at one point. That actually blows my mind. I mean, I could definitely see it. I could see how. It's just the sheer amount of people being stuck in the UK is what I struggle to sort of understand or see. So that's where I'm lost.
Populated city until the 1920s. Another city then took over right up until the 60s, and that was the city of New York. Long before New York City had high-rise buildings, it was the stomping ground of Algonquin natives who hunted and fished where people now trade stocks and eat pastrami sandwiches. It wasn't until 1624 that European settlers would start a community in the city when families of the Dutch West India Company made a home of Nutten Island. That's now known as Governor's Island and is between Manhattan and Brooklyn. Being Dutch, they called this place New Amsterdam. Some historians say that the Dutch bought the area from the natives.
We don't need to know
for
Amsterdam.
The
We
peace
don't need
between
that.
the natives and the Euro
It's too early for that.
expansionists didn't
You
last,
drinking
and the
that.
trouble ended with a lot more native casualties than Dutch casualties. New Amsterdam soon covered much of what we regard as New York City today, but the imperialistic Brits, guided by London prospectors, would soon burst the Dutch bubble. On August 26, 1664, 4 British frigates sailed to New Amsterdam and in a bloodless coup took control and renamed it New York
Dang,
after the
really?
Duke of York, not the city of York, in the north of England. At that time, the city had about 1,500 Europeans and 375 Africans, most of whom were slaves. It remained that way for over 100 years, and even when American independence was on the cards, New York City was a stronghold for British loyalists. In 1783, the British were forced out, and in 1789, it became the first national capital of the US. Only in 1790 did the capital become
okay.
Washington, D.C.
I was about to say, I
Like
was like,
London,
wait, what?
the growing city had its fair share of growing pains, including great fires and huge loss of life due to yellow fever and cholera. Nonetheless, by 1850, the population was more than 550,000, and New York City had become a center of the world. So now we come to the present day. The population of London right now is thought to be about 8.7 million. This has spiked lately due to the arrival of ethnic minorities that make up about 44% of the city's population. London covers an area of 607 square miles, making it the biggest city in Europe. New York City has a population of 8.538 million, and it is mixed in terms of ethnicity. About 44% of
I did not realize London was also bigger than New York. What? I thought New York had about 16 million people there, not 8.538. So London is the biggest city in Europe. It is also much bigger than New York. It's a much older city, and it's more likely to be traveled to by a lot. And is it a better country to live in, technically, based on the video we watched yesterday? Mine is blown right now. I don't.
residents are white Caucasian, 27% Hispanic, 25% Black or African American, with a much smaller mix of other ethnicities. The city covers 304 square miles and is the biggest city in the USA, though considerably smaller than London. But with almost equal populations, this means New Yorkers have far less space.
Yeah, that
So what about the
sucks.
standard of living in these cities? They are both pivotal cities regarding the financial sector, though one website claims that London's financial sector is slightly bigger with 340,000 employees to New York's 322,000. As of March 2017, the Global
like, everything
Financial Centers
runs through
Index
Wall Street in
puts
the US.
London at the center of the world, with New York hot on its heels in the number 2 spot.
Really?
New York has more billionaires, with 103 in 2017 according to Forbes, while London only has 72.
He
London
did
is
not
said to
spell
have better job
billionaires
growth though,
correctly.
over the last decade. For the average Joe among us, how is life in these
Probably
cities?
terrible.
Again, it depends on which source you read. The latest cost of living index by Expatizen puts New York as the 5th most expensive city to live in the world, and London in 12th, with food and housing in New York being more expensive.
Bro, what the heck? So London not only is a bigger city in terms of square miles and population, it's also a huge financial hub, and it's less expensive to live in than New York City. Listen, New York is just not winning here. It's not winning. Like, I'd rather move to London than New
Clothes
York.
and transportation being cheaper. The Guardian reports that after Brexit, London got a lot cheaper, stating that the city has recently arrived at a newfound bargain basement status. In
Bargain
fact,
basement
according to the
status.
website Numbeo, that compares cost of prices around the world, the cities are fairly equal in terms of eating, going out, shopping, but just a bit more in New York. Renting in London is cheaper than New York if you're not renting high-end apartments, but actually buying a place is much more expensive in London on
Oh,
average.
well, I mean,
Travel
'cause,
is
yeah,
more
why would you wanna
expensive
buy a
in
place in
London,
New York,
whether you
though?
buy your own gas or use public transportation. Gas and electric is also more expensive in London, but internet is almost half the price of New York on average. Education is more expensive in New York, and it's thought that inner city London schools are a bit better than inner city New York schools. The average wage in New York is $4,542 a month, while in London it is only $2,952. That might sound bad for Londoners, but they do get free healthcare, lots of paid vacation, and in general, better workers'
Yeah,
rights. Money
they do.
aside, what about the
I was so
general
mad about
day-to-day
the paid
creature
vacation.
comforts?
5
Well,
weeks,
as
guys.
London is
You
much
didn't know.
bigger, it also has more space. With that, you get more parks and more green spaces. At the same time, New York is easier to get around, and some people speaking on forums say a bit more fun, as it's compact, and unlike London, is more of a 24-hour city. If you're
It is
out
the
at
city
night,
that never
London may
sleeps,
have more
baby.
crimes in terms of robberies and assaults, but New York has more murders. According to Numbeo, respondents to a survey said they felt similar about safety in London and New York. It seems the difference is bigger crimes are more common in New York, but your chances of finding trouble on the street is more likely in London.
Wow.
We should, however,
That is
take
not
this to
something I would
those that
think.
have lived in both cities. According to one American man who did both for many years, he said on a forum thread that both cities were too expensive even when single. He loved the open, sprawling green spaces in London and at times didn't like the noisy, claustrophobic streets of New York. He did, however, like the fact that in New York you could sit down anywhere and find enjoyment, while London was too spread out for him at times. The writer agreed with the sites we cited already on costs of things, also the heavy workload in the US for most people, but did say in terms of meeting new people, socializing, or partying, New York is easier. One more thing he pointed out that we didn't mention yet was the weather, which is a deal breaker for some people. New York has colder winters and can have steaming hot summers, whereas London is cool, damp, and gray for much of the year, with some warm weeks in summer and only a moderately cold winter compared to New York. We'll end it there with the weather. Have you lived in or visited
That's something
either
interesting
of
that I never really thought, as the weather sort of having the aspect on your lifestyle in either New York and or London. But honestly, this whole video has been extremely informal. The violence part I did not actually expect, so you're more likely to be assaulted or robbed in London, but obviously the heinous crimes, including murders with guns, is much more frequent in New York, where people can, own them. So this has actually been a really weird and fun bit. And the guy who lived in both, I feel sorry for that man. I'm sorry he had to go back and forth between the two, especially for work or for play or whatever. Having to even travel between the two, I guess flying wouldn't be bad, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. Where would you rather live, London or New York? If you're from London, I'm gonna guess you're gonna say New York, and if you're from New York, I'd guess you say London. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys for another video. Peace.